So these are the 5 trends that I see in the field of psychology, the field of therapy, that have really led me to create the whole Pentabelt program. So let's go through them. The first major trend that I see is that there is going to be a significant shift from a focus of therapy on treatment and towards resilience. Meaning, the traditional approach is, let's say you have a broken arm. You go to a medical doctor, the doctor treats your arm. And let's say you have a major depression or an anxiety disorder. You go to a mental health therapist and you get treatment. Well, in the future, I believe that there will be a shift towards developing resilience. So instead of waiting until you have a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder to go to a therapist, in the future, you'll sort of go to a therapist as a rite of passage, as almost an adult initiation ritual, where you will develop the skills to have a sense of resilience, to better resist the kind of those deep depressions and those anxiety conditions. In other words, what will likely happen is you will see, as part of becoming an adult, an individual working often with a therapist to preemptively resolve many of the issues that inevitably affect people growing up. In many cultures, there is an adult initiation ritual where a youngster is paired with somebody older and they process, childhood scars and they prepare for adulthood, right? They learn the techniques, the processes to manage difficult experiences, forgive people, and kind of learn to connect. What we're doing right now is we're just sort of sending people out into the wild and basically saying, hey, if it's too much, then you can get treatment. Well, what we're finding is that more and more people are getting depression, more and more people are getting anxiety. It is so common now that at some point there will likely be a shift towards preemptively resolving these issues. In other words, I think it's time to start assuming that a psychological condition is inevitable in today's society. And as anybody in the field of therapy, whatever therapy, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So the focus will be on resolving, or rather teaching resilience, rather than just sitting around and waiting for someone to develop a clinical condition. So that's the first trend. The second major trend is the greater recognition that mood disorders, depressions and anxieties, are mostly exogenous in nature. What do I mean by that? Well, endogenous means like something in your brain. So there are just some people who genetically predisposed to have depression disorder or anxiety, and those few people we treat. What we're finding is that depression and anxiety are way more common, and it's often linked towards lack of connection, childhood trauma, relationship abuses. And so this resilience training that I talked in the first trend is about healing the traumas of the past, gathering the strength to better connect with others, and protect yourself, right? There's a famous saying that you can't therapy yourself out of a terrible job or an awful relationship. Bad jobs, bad relationships have a profound impact on mental health. So part of any adult initiation ritual is generally how to avoid these pitfalls. So just like it's natural to just go to college, and most people go to college, it's going to be natural to work with somebody to learn how to foster healthy relationships, right? Learn how to avoid the common issues that people run into, that young adults run into, in order to have these healthy relationships, in order to process whatever came up in the past. Everybody has some childhood scars, processing that so that it doesn't keep affecting your future. The third major trend is that, relating to psychedelics, they will completely take over the therapy landscape. Now, this is not to say that psychedelics are a cure-all. They're not a panacea, right? Plenty of people who have engaged in psychedelic therapy, myself included, continue to have issues, right? It's not a cure-all. But it is, I predict, a generational step, right? Kind of like going with cancer from chemo to immunotherapy. Immunotherapy isn't there yet, it's not curing everything, but it seems to be like a major step forward from the traditional treatment. And this focus with psychedelics will be not just between the individual and the therapist, but the individual and the community. So I kind of have a term, the Shenendelic, which is like psychedelic, but where psychedelic is mind manifesting, Shenendelic is community manifesting. And that's going to be that third major trend, that there will be a increased focus on psychedelics as part of therapy and using psychedelics to forge connections, develop a community, okay? So it's entirely possible that in the future, it may just almost be a ritual where once a year or so you have with your tribe a psychedelic experience to resolve things and to kind of forge the connections. But I generally believe that just like now you have therapy mixed with something, so you have therapy with a CBT focus, you have therapy with a Gestalt focus. In the future, the default will generally be psychedelics with a cognitive focus, or psychedelics with a Gestalt focus. So that probably in 15, 20 years, when people think of therapy, they will generally default to psychedelic therapy. All right, that's the third trend. The fourth trend, the large language models. There's no way of avoiding it. AI isn't going anywhere, and in the future, AI will be a major component of somebody's therapeutic growth and well-being. When you look back on the third trend, that psychedelic therapy will be everywhere and the shift will be kind of an adult initiation, that means much, much more people are going to be engaging in therapy, right? And there's simply not enough therapists to fill that role, and it can be kind of quite expensive. It's entirely likely that just because of cost, most psychedelic therapy will engage in groups. And so it's entirely possible that AI can fill that kind of individual role, individual attention. In this process, with the community being there, it's going to be very helpful to have a counterbalance. So in the future, it's entirely likely that, once, hopefully, fingers crossed, once we have a lot more time on our hands, once AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, a decent portion of our time is going to be spent with our tribe, with our friends, with our family, with our chosen family. That's going to have a heavy, heavy influence, especially after years of being isolated. And the temptation is you can focus too much on your community. You can, there's all kinds of potentially toxic things that can happen in a community. You can form cults. It's going to be really important to have a counterbalance to help steer you in the right direction, and that can possibly be AI. So in the future, we're going to have that kind of individual with the individual focus with the AI. You're going to have the community focus. And this leads into the fifth major trend, that in the future, the therapist will, let's say the therapist will have kind of three major roles. The first is to provide that safe introduction to psychedelics. Focus on prevention, focus on screening. Someone's becoming an adult, and the therapist is there to kind of introduce them to the process. The second role will be to serve as a counterbalance. Serve as a counterbalance to the AI, serve as a counterbalance to the community. In other words, teach and lead the individual on how to use both entities in a healthy manner. And then, of course, the third role is going to be the traditional treatment. There's always going to be about 10 to 20% of the population where psychedelics is just probably not going to be a good fit, especially for people who are undergoing like a psychotic break or issues like that. Might just be contraindicated, and so the therapist does that traditional role. But mostly in the future, the future is going to be a focus on groups and a focus on AI, and the therapist will be there to help kind of manage both of these forces. So with that in mind, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's start in the other clips exploring the ins and outs of psychedelic therapy. Thank you.